And the segment of the show is the debate, the uncensored one. We have gathered and we want to have all kinds of views. And so as we do on this show, we invite guests that are going to stand on opposite sides of the debate, if you like, and this is why it's important that we hear these differences of opinion so that we're able to make up our minds about any unfolding situation in the country. And the one that grips the country right now are matters related to former President Jacob Zuma. And so joining us for this particular discussion is Mondili Gungubele, ANC NEC member, who joins us from Boksburg. And we also have Professor Thuli Madonsela, who also is joining us here. She joins us from Cape Town. Nthabiseng Dubazana, legal expert, is in Johannesburg. And Sifiso Mahlangu, chief editor at the Star newspaper, also joining us. And we also have Professor Richard Calland, who also joins us for this particular discussion. To all of you, my thanks for joining us. As we do on this show, we open up with an opening statement. And I'm going to start with you, Professor Madonsela. And the question we're asking is whether former President Jacob Zuma, should we see him as a martyr or a constitutional delinquent? Your response, please.
Thank you, Colleen. Clearly, a president or former President Zuma has been found to be in violation of the Constitution in this particular matter. And that finding of violation of the Constitution by disrespecting the Constitutional Court and treating it with the highest contempt was a finding made by 100% of the judges that judged him. The judges only disagreed when it came to what should be the right remedy. Should we call him a constitutional delinquent? It's a little bit harsh, but he certainly is not a martyr, even though as his trademark approach, he is trying to present himself as a martyr. President Zuma was an employee of the state, employee number one, and his duty was to be accountable and to be the defender of the Constitution, the number one defender of the Constitution. And all this matter has always been about has been to get him to account, and he has refused to do so, giving various reasons at given stages. Even when he appeared before the Constitution, he didn't address the Constitution. Even when he appeared before the Commission of Inquiry, he didn't address the Commission of Inquiry on the matters that he had already been given years of advance notice of, because you'll remember this matter was part heard. So he knew what the questions were, and he answered none of those questions. Instead, he chose to treat the commission with disrespect, and then he treated the apex court of this country with utmost contempt.
Let's come to you, Nthabiseng Dubazana. The Professor Thuli Madonsela says perhaps the description of a constitutional delinquent is a bit harsh. So where do you stand? Is former President Zuma a martyr or a constitutional delinquent?
Well, I think I agree with Professor Madonsela in this one. I don't think he's a martyr in the sense that, he is putting himself in the forefront as the utmost person who's going to be judged the most harshly by the court. However, he is the first person to have ever been sentenced by the Constitutional Court. I do stand to be corrected, but from my knowledge, he is the first person to ever be sentenced in terms of a criminal aspect in the criminal contempt by the Constitutional Court. And now he's also now going to be the first person to bring an application to request the court to rescind its own judgment. And now that in that instance, I suppose he is for like a bit of an initiator, like he is now going to set the bar, if you may, about how these matters will be dealt with in terms of the Constitution and the Constitutional Court itself. Madonsela is correct in saying that the court agrees, and all of us, I think, in the field agree that there is a contempt of a court order, because a court order existed and he did not abide by it. The issue is whether or not the sentence was appropriate for the kind of crime that he was basically charged with. So, and calling him a constitutional delinquent, perhaps not, but he's opening up another avenue of constitutional law that hasn't been tapped into in the past 20-some odd years. So it will be interesting to see what kind of precedent that's going to be set as a result of this whole case. That, I think, for me, is what he's doing. He is like opening up a completely different area of constitutional law that will then be applicable in years to come.
Sifiso Mahlangu, where do you stand on this particular question?
I think this is a theoretical question. It's a question of opinion makers and not lawyers. It should be a question of opinion writers and certainly not justices. Whether one is a constitutional delinquent or not should depend on the case. Whether one is guilty or not should depend on the evidence. It should never be that we've judged this person before and we've had dealings with this individual before, so therefore we should sentence them in character. I think characterization is an ill to this judiciary. It's a difficult question to answer. It's an unfair question to answer. I don't think anyone is a martyr. Mr. Zuma should be judged on the contents of this matter. He should not be judged on the basis of what other judges have found or what other magistrates have found. He should not be judged with historic devices of what the judges have learned about him. He should not be judged according to what some opinion writers have written in Sunday newspapers. Judges are expected to be objective. Judges are expected to apply cases according to the evidence presented before them. I think the question you're asking this afternoon sets the tone for who is the man we're judging today before he is presented to the courts. And I think that sets a ground for an individual to be misjudged. Whether you like him or not and whether he's been at fault before, for me is immaterial. Judge for the evidence presented before you.
Mondili Gungubele, let's come to you, sir. A martyr or a constitutional delinquent? Which does your comrade fit into?
I guess, good afternoon, Thuli. I guess you are actually throwing us into a different discussion, which I don't think I'll be able to engage other than saying, we're meeting today when one of the heroic freedom fighters finds himself on the wrong side of the law. This is as per the pronouncement by the highest court in the land. We're meeting at a time when, unfortunately in our country, baselessly I want to argue, there is a new tendency to question the authority of the judiciary without challenging it within its own legal realm. That is one of the most unfortunate things. And again, unfortunate in the sense that if I speak from the ANC, I know the prescripts of the organization on how the conference, even the latest one, the recent one, instructed its members to accept the supremacy of the constitution and the law of the country, which is in our resolution. I find it very disappointing when I find people masquerading in ANC uniforms, attacking judiciary for exercising its authority within the constitution. Whether there's a net matter here or delinquent, that's not my place. Thanks, colleague.
Thank you very much, Mondili Gungubele. Let's come to you, Professor Calland. It's the same question I'm going to pose to you before we get deep into the discussion. Former President Jacob Zuma, do you view him as a martyr or a constitutional delinquent?
Well, it's not really my opinion that matters. I tend to agree with my editorial colleague, as it were, from the start. What matters is what the court has said, and the courts have on repeated occasions said that Mr. Zuma is a constitutional delinquent. I could spend the next 10 minutes reeling off the decisions of the higher courts, the Supreme Court of Appeal, and the Constitutional Court repeatedly have found that Mr. Zuma has failed to respond to his obligations under the law and under the Constitution in particular. So it's a trite question, to be perfectly honest. I think the answer is very, very clear, because if we trust our courts and if we respect the rule of the law, as I think we all should, then the findings are there before us. The only question is, why is Mr. Zuma not willing to respect them himself? Why is he now encouraging his followers to abandon that respect for the rule of law? What message does that send out to the rest of the country? And really, what does it mean for the future of the ANC if, as it seems to have done, it's lost control of this situation, that it's allowed one of its senior members to flout the law and to really set the worst possible example?
Professor Calland, thank you very much for those short remarks. When we return, we get deep into the discussion with my panel about the situation that the former president finds himself, but perhaps it's not just him. That is the topic of discussion here. As Professor Calland says, has the ANC lost control here? Mondili Gungubele may be better placed to answer that. We continue in just a moment. Very good afternoon to you. If you're just joining us, this is Politics Unscripted. I have a panel which is here to discuss with me what we should make of the situation that faces the former president, but also perhaps the country at large. I want to take it back to Professor Madonsela. Prof, the reason I want to start back with you is that the former president has just addressed his supporters in Nkandla this afternoon, and he's revisited the very remedial actions that you recommended, and that was that of the president taking away his powers, he says, of appointing a judge to head the commission. But perhaps you're probably going to say this is water under the bridge. We need not visit this area again. What's important here to understand from you, Prof, is that has there been any sort of conspiracy here that is being sort of said by the former president? Because he does seem to point to some kind of conspiracy when he says that the recommendation of the Chief Justice that it was going to be Siraj Desai who would head the Commission of Inquiry into state capture, and then a day later he comes back to say that no, that judge is said to be the wrong one, and that Raymond Zondo should be the person who heads this inquiry. And I must just add, Professor, that someone who is listening in on this conversation has actually written on Twitter seeking to remind me about what has been said by the former president, which today he sort of, he rejigs it a bit, because Karen Moore tweeted at the time, and it was in November the 13th, 2020, last year. And he says, and she tweeted saying, former President Jacob Zuma claims Deputy Chief Justice Zondo wasn't Chief Justice Mogoeng's first choice for the state capture inquiry chairperson. Zuma says Mogoeng initially wanted to recommend Western Cape High Court Judge Siraj Desai, but changed his mind. Desai, in inverted commas, this is the first I'm hearing of this. This is Karen Moore tweeting this particular information, where she seeks to also put in inverted commas Judge Siraj Desai, and his comments are that this is the first I am hearing of this. Karen Moore seems to be quoting word for word Judge Siraj Desai's response at the time that Zuma said this information. Can you just dispel this whole issue for us?
Thank you, Paul. Firstly, when President Zuma announced his appointment of Deputy Chief Justice Zondo, he did so with fanfare, with so much happiness, and he specifically said that he had confidence in Judge Zondo, that he was going to be impartial. if President Zuma is telling the truth that he had some relationship with Judge Zondo, he should have known that at the time. And he didn't disclose that, unless, of course, he expected that relationship to work in his favor. When he first approached the commission the first time to present, again, he never objected to Judge Zondo's presiding on that commission. It was only when it became clear that the commission was not going to foray into the history, into conspiracies, but was going to hold him accountable on the subject matter of the commission, which was his relationship with the Guptas, his relationship with the companies that are co-owned by his son and the Guptas, and the processes that led to the appointment of this commission. Then he upped and left, and then he raised the question about Deputy Chief Justice Zondo. I do want to indicate that the fact that you didn't appoint a judge does not make the process unjust. None of us appoints the judges that judge us. It just so happens that if you're the president of the country, you have the power to appoint the commissioner. But separating appointment and selection doesn't mean you don't have the power to appoint. For example, the president appoints all judges. He doesn't select them. The president appoints the pub protector, and at least at a formal level, he doesn't select the pub protector. At a private level, what happens behind closed doors, we never know. But at a formal level, he doesn't select the pub protector. That doesn't make it unfair. Again, if he had any quarrels about this, the time to raise those quarrels should have been before the appointment of this commission.
Thank you very much, Professor Madonsela. Let's come to you, Mondili Gungubele. A very interesting statement is made by Professor Calland that has the ANC, perhaps it's put as a question mark, has the ANC lost control of this situation here? And perhaps as a rider to that, would you say that politics has any role to play here, where the former president now is faced with a prospect of imprisonment? Should politics have a role to play?
Thanks, Toli. Maybe my view would be, I will start by saying, repeat exactly maybe the way I started. Zuma, Comrade JZ is not an ordinary member of the ANC. He touched many hearts and souls in the organization. So seeing him being sentenced would not be happily acceptable. Having said that, it therefore means if he is being sentenced in this manner, there might be those who will react negatively to that, and dealing with that within the organization become a political management. What does it mean to educate people, to actually remind them about the stance of the organization when it comes to the rule of the law? Therefore, I want to argue that there is an area for political management in actually counseling and advising those who seem to be hurt for whatever reasons, either based on the fact that the former president touched them, that they should understand at the end of the day, the laws of the country should prevail.
Mr. Mahlangu, let's come to you. And as a fellow member of the media, yesterday, and interestingly, Mondili Gungubele speaks about an element of political management, or he points to a scope for political management at a time like this. Yesterday, a member of the media, SABC reporter, Samgele Masego, nearly got manhandled, if you like, in Gandla, where someone clad in camouflage comes almost to stop him from talking to the nation through his camera, of course. How should we, as members of the media, carry ourselves at a time like this? Because it is a very intense time in the country.
You know, Poli, the fourth estate has a significant role to play in building this democracy. But often the fourth estate is accused of taking lines when we report on things that people are not happy with. Unfortunately, I didn't see that interview with Samgele Masego. But often when you cross lines and individuals are not happy with a particular report you're making or a live broadcast you're having, there are those threats. And it also talks to the politicization of newsrooms. And I want to make this example. Ms. Madonsela doesn't refute that Mr. Zondo should have come clean about his alleged relationship with Mr. Zuma. But Ms. Madonsela, us the journalists, made this report, and we said Mr. Zondo and Mr. Zuma have a relationship. Mr. Zuma's wife, Thobeka Madiba Zuma, and her older sister has a child with Mr. Zondo. And we published it months in advance. Mr. Zondo did not come clean on that. At a later hour, Mr. Zondo then finally confessed to say, oh yeah, Zuma and I have children in the same family. I dated where he dated. Of course, that suggests that a relationship existed. But it was not to be believed because it didn't fit a particular narrative. So it's very easy for, politicians to say, oh, well, Samgele Masego should not have been there. That's because he's not reporting what they like at the time. But when we report things that are often accurate, that people don't want to hear, that irks them and touches their nerve, they want to shut it down.
Professor Madonsela, before I go to my other panelists, you seem to disagree. Ms.
Madonsela would simply have to answer, was she aware that Mr. Zondo, Deputy Chief Justice Zondo, had a child at Thobeka Zuma's household? They both had children in the same household. And if that doesn't express a relationship or a family link between these two gentlemen.
Prof?
Can I indicate why I shook my head? Because I didn't get into that space. All I said was President Zuma. Remember, the appointing authority here was President Zuma. And the accusing person in this case is President Zuma. And I am saying the facts as he alleges them were with him at the point at which he appointed Deputy Chief Justice Zondo. And at that stage, not only did he just appoint him, he expressed full confidence in him, knowing these facts. And then only when Deputy Chief Justice Zondo made it clear that he wasn't going to foray into conspiracies, he was going to keep the inquiry simple. Did you do the things that the evidence before me suggests you did? Only then.
Ms. Madonsela, are you saying Deputy Chief Justice Zondo did not have a role to play?
I'm still on the floor.
Mr. Mahlangu, please allow Professor Madonsela to complete her statement.
Exactly. Just flag the question. That's what I normally say when I'm dealing with people. Flag it and stay with it. But I was saying the appointing authority was President Zuma, and the duty was on him if he thought that this relationship was a conflicted one, to raise that, because he knew these facts. This is not a new fact, but only came to him the day he went to the commission and didn't like the proceedings. That's what I'm saying, and that's a fact.
All right. Professor Madonsela, thank you very much. Let's come to you, Nthabiseng Dubazana. Right now, there are two legal avenues that the former president has sought to explore. The first one is that on Tuesday, there is a likely hearing in Pietermaritzburg where he is seeking to interdict the police minister from arresting him until such time that the Constitutional Court has dealt with his application for rescission, which will be heard on the 12th of July. the element here, the crucial element, is about the arrest, imminent arrest of the former president or imprisonment.
Yeah.
Does this decision to approach these two courts at the same time stay the possibility of him sitting in jail while that is being decided?
Well, there are two schools of thought on this situation. The one school of thought is that because the Constitutional Court did not expressly say that in them accepting the application and setting it down for the 12th of July is on condition of him presenting himself to the SAPS in order for him to serve his sentence. So I've been saying this, I'm of the opinion that because that wasn't expressly said, perhaps he has a stay in order for him not to appear, not to present himself rather, to the prison. Now, the application that is being made for the interdict of the warrant to be executed is scheduled for after the day that he is supposed to have been in prison, because he has up until midnight today in order to present himself to the nearest SAPS to start his sentence. The issue is going to be spoken of only on the 6th of July. So what does it mean? Does it mean while that matter is yet to be heard on the 6th of July, will he be in custody between now and the 6th of July? Or would it mean that as a result of the pending matter in the Constitutional Court, does it mean he doesn't have to present himself to prison until the matter is heard on the 12th of July? This is uncharted waters, as I said before. It has never been done before. And I have never seen, I stand to be very corrected, I have never seen where an inferior court is asked to rescind or stand in the stay an application or a ruling by a higher court, because the Pietermaritzburg court currently is the inferior court. The Constitutional Court is the higher court. So how are we then requesting a lower court to then stop an order that comes from a superior court? How is that going to work? What is the framework going to be like? And the sections that were quoted in the founding affidavit of Jacob Zuma quote the Rule 29, which also goes with Rule 42 of the Uniform Court rules of the court, which arguably says that you are allowed to apply for a court to receive its own judgment, etc. But here we are, when the Constitutional Court gave the sentence, it basically barred the avenue of appeal, correct? Because it's the apex court. So what are we doing in the small court? What are we applying for in the small court in order to ask the big court to do? I don't understand. It's quite interesting, because now if for argument's sake, the sentence for Jacob Zuma is rescinded, and let's say he's now be given a suspended sentence. In normal court situations, when you are convicted and sentenced, you have the avenue to appeal both conviction and sentence, or one of the two. So if this is not going to be the case, and the court sets a precedent whereby you can now apply to the very same court to rescind or vary its own judgment, does it now mean that the avenue of appeal is now being removed? Because that's how we would go in order for a superior court to look at what the inferior court has said and then come to a different conclusion. Are we now saying that the appeal procedure might just be removed as a result of what could happen on the 12th of July? And on the 6th of July, what ruling is the High Court going to say? Because they will have to refer it back, I assume, to the Constitution to deal with it, because that was their decision. They can't interfere. I think perhaps Part B of the notice of motion to the Pietermaritzburg court, possibly they could deal with that one, because they are asking the court to deal with the criminal aspect of contempt of court. Right. Perhaps that they could do this. Yeah.
Professor Calland, before we take a short breather, the stakes, political stakes in the country have never been higher. The legal implications also have never been higher there. Tell me about how you view this situation, and perhaps put in that equation the police who should be managing this situation.
Well, first of all, let me say I think it's wrong to suggest that the political stakes have never been higher. I think there have been many occasions in the past in this country's difficult and tortuous history where the political stakes have been much much higher. We must be very careful not to exaggerate what is going on here. Mr. Zuma has a small number of clearly very ardent supporters, but they are located in one particular place. The idea that this country is on the verge of some kind of widespread instability as a result of this matter is, I think, far-fetched and very far removed from the facts. So we must be very careful how we handle this. On the legal matter, I tend to agree with Mr. Dubazana that it's a tricky issue. I think there is legal division of opinion. I agree with her that it would be curious for a lower court to interdict or stay the order of a higher court, in this case the apex court, constitutional court. So I think that would be very curious. And one of the points I think we all have to, again, be very careful in making sure the public, through the media, understand, is that this application for rescission is not an appeal. It is anything but an appeal. An application for rescission cannot be appealed through the back door. So all it is, a rescission, and we must again emphasize this, an opportunity to apply for rescission is when the court have got something wrong as a matter of fact. For example, an order is made against me because I have defaulted on paying my rent. But in the order of the court, my name is wrong, or my address is wrong, or the amount that I owe is wrong, and it's clearly wrong. That is the sort of situation where rescission is appropriate, where the person who's won the judgment, or maybe the person who's lost the judgment, goes back to the court and said, here is a blatant mistake of fact. Can you fix it? And that is what his rescission is about. So, frankly, this application by Mr. Zuma has probably between 0 and 1% of success. It's yet again an attempt to gerrymander the legal system. He has the right to do that. And one of the great ironies of Mr. Zuma's career is that the legal system that he does so much to attack and undermine is also the legal system he relies upon so much in order to defend his interests to the bitter end on every single occasion. And lastly, if I may, if I'm not delaying your adverts, can I just say a word about the earlier discussion about truth and the role of the media?
Sure.
It's clear that yesterday there was potentially a very serious breach of media freedom. And luckily the journalist showed extraordinary bravery and principle in standing up to the thuggery that he was faced with. And I think we should commend him for that. We must be careful not to fall into the Trumpian pot of accepting the lies that are peddled by Mr. Zuma. Mr. Mahlangu, with respect, seems very keen to do that. We need to be very clear to fact check, so that when Mr. Trump gets up and reels off a series of lies, as he did earlier today, just like Donald Trump, potentially inciting violence, then we must be very careful, all of us, as commentators, as journalists and academics, must be very careful to try and defend the truth and subject those unfounded claims to proper, careful scrutiny.
Claudia, I'd like to respond to Professor Calland, please.
Let me allow you to respond, Mr. Mahlangu, shortly after this breather. We'll continue the conversation. In fact, we'll wrap it up shortly after this.
Clear. If Mr. Zuma is not happy with the decision of the Constitutional Court, the only place for him to go is the Constitutional Court. And unlike others, I'm not against him approaching the Constitutional Court for rescission, and I agree with Ms. Dubazana that that's part of exploring the avenues of justice that are there in our constitutional system, and that's how we develop the law. As to the rest of us, we must stop being embedded to any camp. We should treat this matter the way we would have treated it if it was a matter of Ubabu Cele from Emanzimeleni. Would we allow Ubabu Cele to deal with our legal system with so much disrespect? And if he is allowed, and then everybody else is allowed, would we have constitutional democracy? And my view is we wouldn't. Therefore, we should stop this idea of all animals are equal, but some are more equal than others, which is what President Zuma seemingly wants us to do.
Professor Thuli Madonsela, that's where we're going to leave this particular discussion. Thank you all for your participation today, and thanks indeed to you for affording us your time listening to the different viewpoints. You heard it at some point. It was slightly heated, but it's important that all the voices are heard. Thank you very much. This has been the Uncensored Debate.